which is because he was believed by politicians who voted for his conflict, and he was believed by large sections of the media who managed to convince some of the British public, but not all of us, that this war was worth fighting. So that's the peculiar situation we find ourselves in Britain at the moment.
Yeah, well, and the whole run-up to the Iraq War was such an amazing thing, because really, I remember a lot of the polls on the eve of war here were 50-50, where 50% of the people were going, look, man, Iraq didn't do 9/11, and they're not really a threat, and we don't trust these Bush people to, line us into this thing and pressuring us like this to do this. And then the other 50% of the people thought, how could you all be opposed to a war against the guys who did 9/11?
Yeah.
And so you had, it wasn't just Scott Ritter and Justin Raimondo. It was 50% of the American people knew it was bull.
Yeah. And huge numbers of British people didn't accept it as well. It's worth remembering that in February 2003, just 3 or 4 weeks before the war started, there was a demonstration in Hyde Park in London where there were 1 million people. And that is a huge demonstration in a country of 60 million people. And they all said, we don't want this war. So there was a lot of public reaction against it. And the story I wrote about in The Guardian, which came out on the eve of the war, on the 18th of March 2003, Anne Clwyd, who is a Labour MP here, she published an article saying that Saddam Hussein had a people-shredding machine, where he would put his opponents, shred them, and then put their remains into plastic bags and then use them as fish food. The most lunatic story you ever heard. And no one questioned it, no one challenged it. And then I investigated it about a year afterwards in early 2004, and there was absolutely no evidence for it at all. And what that story effectively was, it was the modern-day version of the babies being thrown from incubators. Because at the start of the first Gulf War in 1990 and 1991, there was this crazy PR-driven story that Iraqi soldiers were taking Kuwaiti babies from incubators and throwing them on the floor and using the incubator's electricity. It was just completely invented. And the people shredding story was the same thing. It was used just as the war was about to start in a desperate bid to kind of batter the British public into effectively blackmailing us into supporting this war. The headline on her article was, "See men shredded and then dare to say you don't support this war." So it was a form of political blackmail. And it's those kind of stories I think we need to remember, just to remind ourselves that Blair and Bush did some terrible things. The WMD thing was a whole load of rubbish. But at the same time, there were other propaganda stories that were widely disseminated across the media, and we need to hold those to account as well so that we can understand the broader hysteria that existed in the run-up to the Iraq war.
Yeah. Well, just for the record here, because this is something that we haven't been covering very much on this show, and it certainly has not been covered very much in the American press at all, has it in fact come out in this Chilcot Inquiry that the Tony Blair regime knew good and well they were lying about missiles, about Al-Qaeda, about mustard gas 45 minutes away, etc.?
Well, it's the Chilcot Inquiry is very, I would urge American listeners not to get too excited about the Chilcot Inquiry, because although you don't have anything similar in America, it's important to recognize that it doesn't have the jurisdiction to find anyone guilty. It's not going to press charges against any of these politicians. It's basically, we described it on my website, Spiked, as a kind of therapeutic talking shop. It's basically therapy for the state, rather than a real way of getting to grips with what happened and holding people responsible. So it's an area for the state and the media to come and tell their stories, and people have cried there and people have made passionate speeches and all this. It's basically a form of therapy for the state to get over the crisis of Iraq, which is really kind of narcissistic and self-serving. But I think it's widely known now in Britain by the vast majority of the public and the vast majority of the media that Blair told lies and that he exaggerated the threat posed by Saddam Hussein. And I think that's pretty much established. And the role of the Chilcot Inquiry is basically just to allow the British government and the British state to kind of brush all this stuff under the carpet so that they can get on with business as usual. And that business as usual will include more foreign interventions. We're still in Afghanistan. We still think we have the right to invade other countries. So the problem with the Chilcot Inquiry is that it talks about Iraq a lot, but it's not going to resolve the politics of interventionism that gave rise to that conflict in the first place.
Wow, well, all you guys need to do is just elect a black guy with a funny name, and then you won't have to go through all this terrible, rehashing evidence and testimony and stuff, because that's how America got over Iraq. we chanted, the surge worked about 75 times, and then we changed political parties and skin tone barely of our executive leadership. And now, as far as the American people and certainly the American media are concerned, Iraq doesn't even exist, never happened, don't worry about it. And the fact that there's still 110,000 American troops there, and plus God knows how many contractors, just has nothing to do with anything anymore. You can't find reference to Iraq on the news anywhere. So I'm glad that you guys are going to have the chance to get through this cleansing thing and forget about it.
Great. Well, I think
you'll feel great afterwards.
Yeah, it shows the real danger, I think, both in different ways, in America and Britain. There hasn't been a real reckoning with what happened in Iraq. And by that I mean a real proper debate about who was responsible, what were the politics driving this war, why did the war go so horribly wrong. All those serious questions have not really been addressed and signed off. So the danger is that under Obama, you're going to have more interventions. You know, he's very keen on the Afghanistan thing. As you say, they're still in Iraq. You guys bombed Somalia recently. I think there's going to be, you're bombing inside Pakistan very frequently. And I think that's the danger of not resolving these issues in an honest, open, political fashion with principles and proper debate, is that the responsibility for Iraq is never really decided, and the problem of future interventions is never really going to be sorted out. So we need to have a proper discussion rather than just having the Chilcot thing over here, and rather than people over there just thinking that Obama has fixed all those problems.
Yeah, well, especially as the heat and all the propaganda about Iran heats up more and more. That's the most dangerous one of all. You can kill Somalis all day with minimal blowback, but messing with Iran is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, that's Brendan ONeill. He's the editor of Spiked Online at spiked-online.com. Thanks very much for your time on the show today.
Thanks, Scott.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
They had kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
Well, I think it's important to have experts explain the war and to describe the military hardware, describe the tactics, talk about the strategy behind the conflict. I went to the Pentagon myself several times before the war started, met with important people there and said, for instance, at CNN, here are the generals we're thinking of retaining to advise us on the air and off about the war, and we got a big thumbs up on all of them. That was important.
Should they have used more? Should they, use a Moab, the mother of all bombs, and a few daisy cutters, and, let's not just stop at a couple of cruise missiles.
Newest, biggest, baddest U.S. bomb.
We'll pound them with 2,000-pound bombs and then go in.
2,000-pound bombs in urban areas?
Oh, sure.
The plane I'm holding in my hand here, the F-117 stealth fighter, was used in these attacks significantly.
How do you steer this thing? You have a stick. Is that right?
The White House says it can prove that Saddam Hussein does have weapons of mass destruction, claiming it has solid evidence.
The White House insisted again today it does have solid evidence that Saddam Hussein is hiding an arsenal of prohibited weapons.
They might fight dirty, using weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, or radioactive.
There are ties between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda.
Anthrax, smallpox,
dirty bomb,
Iraq Al-Qaeda connection.
Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda share the same goal. They want to see, both of them want to see Americans dead.